everyone who is listening, and greetings from Hattiesburg. With Southern Miss Radio, I'm Miracle, your host for Southern Miss Today. I intend to provide you with the latest news and captivating stories from our town. Today's jam-packed broadcast includes a Mississippi moment and a news wrap to make sure you're aware of the latest events in your community. To add on to the excitement, we have a very special guest for you. However, before we get too excited, our sponsor has sent us a little message. So hold on tight, everyone, because we will return shortly with more Southern Miss Today content. Stay tuned right here.
Sponsorship for Southern Miss Today comes from Mississippi Beverages. Mississippi Beverages provides water coolers, and coffee service throughout South Mississippi. Take half of your weight in pounds. That's how many ounces of water you need a day. Mississippi Beverages can help you reach that goal by delivering fresh water to your door. To get more information or to set up a cooler and water delivery, you can call Mississippi Beverages at 601-271-2420, or you can find them online.
Never completely ready to adopt a teen.
For late nights writing English papers.
For your teen's music taste.
For dinners, where they talk more on their phone than with you.
For the first time, they call you Mom.
You're never completely ready to adopt a teen, and you can't imagine the reward.
To learn more about adopting a teen, visit adoptuskids.org.
Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back. To start with our exciting on-campus news, at the George Hurst Building on Thursday, September 16th from 5 to 7 p.m., the USM Studio Art faculty's latest creations, including drawings, paintings, prints, sculptures, and ceramics, are on display in the Art and Design Faculty Show. In addition to many others, this year's exhibition includes pieces by Alan Chen, Jacob Cotton, Nathan Mullins, and Mark Risby. September 16th from 5:30 to 7 p.m., join us as we talk about Tracy McMillan's new book, The White Bonus, 5 Families and the Cash Value of Racism in America, with this award-winning investigative reporter. McMillan follows 5 families, one of them from Hattiesburg, to demonstrate the long-term financial benefits of white privilege. A choral showcase concert for the Southern Invitational Choral Conference is being held at the School of Music on Monday, September 16th at 7:15 p.m. In addition to spotlight performances by faculty and students, this thrilling concert includes the Southern Chorale, Concert Choir, and Spirit of Southern. In Hattiesburg news, throughout September and October, the Lucky Rabbit will be a little spooky. The 2,500 square foot Beetlejuice exhibit by the Lucky Rabbit opened to the public on Friday. The attractions are arranged throughout both of its buildings and are visible from the street amid a lot of eerie decor. The owners expressed their excitement about sharing the new film's vintage play with the city of Hattiesburg. Every Saturday and Sunday through Halloween, as well as every Friday night in October, the exhibit will be open. In Mississippi news, a young woman from the coast is becoming well known in Van Cleve by lending a hand to others. 14-year-old Sophie Gammon is occupied filling orders in the garage. This is a result of Lanyards by Sophie outgrowing its prior location. The lemonade stand was a pay-what-you-can operation. The entire $18 that little Sophie Gammon gave to charity were donated, and Gammon has since raised over $10,000, and that was only the beginning. Sophie's pastime grew into a greater passion than she had anticipated. Bead after bead and donation after donation, she donates a portion of her earnings and various products such as toys to charities that are dear to her heart, such as Humane Societies or the Ronald McDonald House. That brings you up to date on news from Southern Miss Today. Stay tuned for soon-to-be updates on sports and the weather. We'll return as soon as we hear from our sponsors.
Sponsorship for Southern Miss Today comes from Mississippi Beverages. Mississippi Beverages provides water coolers, and coffee service throughout South Mississippi. Take half of your weight in pounds. That's how many ounces of water you need a day. Mississippi Beverages can help you reach that goal by delivering fresh water to your door. To get more information or to set up a cooler and water delivery, you can call Mississippi Beverages at 601-271-2420, or you can find them online.
Melissa from Michigan. I work an extra part-time job serving lunch at my child's school, but I still can't afford to put food on our table.
Daniel from California. Choosing whether to pay the rent or pay to fix the car to get to work doesn't leave us with much at all. Now we can't even pay for meals.
Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back, everyone, diving into the Eagle Sports segment. For our sports news, with a ribbon-cutting ceremony held on Friday afternoon at the Hattiesburg Country Club, the University of Southern Mississippi Athletic Department formally opened the Geddes Golf Center. Their 3,500-square-foot golf center provides one of the best facilities in Division I for the USM men's and women's golf team. The Track 4-man system, which offers data points for almost every movement in a golf swing, is available to USM golfers. In addition to tracking and recording swing, the dual radar system also records ball characteristics following contact. Kevin and Sarah Geddes, the primary donors, are honored with the Geddes Golf Center. For more information on USM sports, visit southernmiss.com. Regarding the weather, today's forecast will be partly cloudy with scattered rainstorms primarily during the afternoon, so be sure to keep your umbrella on you. Up next, we have a Mississippi Moments produced by the Center for Oral History and Cultural Heritage with Rolani Branch on her work with the NAACP and the Civil Rights Movement in Hattiesburg.
This is Mississippi Moments, produced by the Center for Oral History and Cultural Heritage at the University of Southern Mississippi and supported by the Mississippi Humanities Council. I'm Bill Ellison. Rolani Branch was active in the Civil Rights Movement between 1959 and 1965. She describes her work with the NAACP and the limited opportunities for black people in Hattiesburg.
The people started coming into the state, the Delta Ministry and the other civil rights groups in the early 60s. I was a very active member. I was secretary of the NAACP and was a member one time of COFO and SNCC. I had been one of those people to attend the March on Washington in 1963, and I tried to get a job in several places in Hattiesburg. You cannot understand or even have a feel for the fact that there were no jobs for black professionals or blacks, period, unless you were a cook or worked in someone's home. You would maybe be a gopher in one of the downtown stores, or you worked at the hospitals in the kitchen or housekeeping, or you were a school teacher. That was it.
To hear more, subscribe to the Mississippi Moments podcast or just like us on Facebook. Mississippi Moments is supported by the Mississippi Humanities Council. The humanities are for everyone.
That was your Mississippi Moment for today. Coming up, we have the pleasure of hearing from Miss Tracy McMillan, so stick with us while we hear a message from one of our sponsors.
Sponsorship for Southern Miss Today comes from Mr. Sippy Beverages. Mr. Sippy Beverages provides water, water coolers, and coffee service throughout South Mississippi. Take half of your weight in pounds. That's how many ounces of water you need a day. Mr. Sippy Beverages can help you reach that goal by delivering fresh water to your door. To get more information or to set up a cooler and water delivery, you can call Mr. Sippy Beverages at 601-271-2420, or you can find them online. Sponsorship comes from American Graphics. Located at 8 Commercial Warehouse Drive in Hattiesburg, American Graphics provides custom screen printing and embroidery. They can be reached by phone at 601-602-2277, and the website is goamericangraphics.com. American Graphics, printing at its finest.
Now please give a warm Golden Eagle welcome to Tracy McMillan. Hello, Miss Tracy. How are you on this wonderful Monday?
I'm very well, Miracle. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Now we hear you're speaking tonight at the Gonzalez Auditorium with Bob Press Race in American Politics and Human Rights classes. Can you give us a little bit more information on that?
Yeah, of course. I'm going to be talking about the work I did for my book, The White Bonus, 5 Families and the Cash Value of Racism in America. So that's a work of narrative nonfiction journalism and memoir, sort of looking at the cash value, sort of the material advantage, right, that goes along with white privilege and really sort of drilling down into that. So we're going to have a conversation sort of about that book and particularly focus on a chapter of the book that's centered here in Hattiesburg and looks at the school district here, the public schools. And then also obviously be open for questions, and hopefully we'll have a lively conversation with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, can you tell us a little more about your book, The White Bonus, 5 Families and the Cash Value of Racism in America?
Yeah, for sure. So The White Bonus, right, as I said, it's journalism and memoir, and it's really looking at sort of the unspoken flip side of racism, right, which is that it doesn't just hurt people of color, and particularly black people. It actually helps white people often, right? Both of those things are happening at the same time. And people are generally pretty comfortable, like if they're going to talk about racism, pretty comfortable saying, okay, here's how it hurts people of color. And that's obviously a very important part of that conversation. That's where that conversation needs to start. But I don't think we can actually make much headway in fighting racism if we're not honest about the full experience of it, right? Which is that it often is conferring benefit for white folks. So that was sort of the general idea. And the way that I do that is half the book is the story of me and my family. So it's an intimate memoir about, my grandparents and parents, then me and my upbringing and my adulthood, all that stuff. And then it alternates with single chapter profiles of different white folks around the country. So I've got folks, a union nurse in Pittsburgh. I've got an IHOP waitress outside of Dallas. I've got a teenage drug dealer in Connecticut from the 90s who actually, because his folks could afford a lawyer, right, was given alternatives to incarceration, ends up as a homeowner in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then I've got two millennial sisters, white girls whose family kept them in the public schools as the public schools here were resegregating in the late 90s and early 2000s.
That is so interesting that you have different experiences with different people of all walks of life to kind of integrate that idea of white privilege. Now, what makes you so passionate about race and the difficulties associated with it?
Yeah, well, I come at it, I think like a lot of white folks that care about this stuff, I grew up with a difficult, there are certainly folks who have harder upbringings than I do, but I grew up with, my family was really devastated by medical bills. There was physical abuse in my household, right? So I had a hard time feeling safe when I was growing up. And so I had a pretty intimate understanding just of what it feels like to have systems outside your control shaping your experience, and just feel very strongly that, that's not cool. And, as I've gone through my life, I've also found that when I've heard people of color talk about racism and what it's like to experience it, the gaslighting, right, being expected to explain to the folks who are hurting you that why this would hurt and so on and so forth, that often for me emotionally connects back to those experiences, particularly of abuse growing up, right? And I think that there's an important parallel to explore, right, which is that, I think a lot of folks get raised in homes with some degree of abuse. They learn to normalize that.
Absolutely.
And then it makes it so that they, particularly for white folks, then they're excusing the social abuse of racism, right? Because I think you can make the argument that racism is sort of a social level form of abuse.
Absolutely. When did this idea come to you in life to write this book?
Yeah, well, I think I'd always been interested in writing a memoir of some kind, but, I work as an investigative journalist. I've had a pretty good career with that. And I didn't really want to do something that was just like, oh, look at me and my story. Like, I'm not that important. It's fine, right? My family's not so crazy or whatever. But I realized that if I could sort of touch on that intimate first-person story and use it to do this broader investigation, to me, that felt really worthwhile. And so I think I started thinking about it in 2015, 2016, and then as that Trump election was sort of coming through, right, we saw J.D. Vance come out with Hillbilly Elegy, and people were so over the moon about that book, and, I read it, and I thought, this is not the way to have this conversation, like, by just blaming poor white people for being poor. Like, that's not helping anybody. So what could I do where we could sort of move the conversation forward, and also where I'm not taking up space that might be better sort of taken up by somebody with firsthand experience of hardship. As a journalist, I'm trained to talk to folks who have experiences that I don't understand and reflect it forward. And as a poverty reporter, I've done that with people of color for a long time, but I think I often really missed some of the story because the racism I had by growing up in this country and the place that I grew up, right? And I didn't want to sort of take up space that would be better served by somebody else. What was a story that I, as a white reporter, could do that might be helpful? So
yeah, it's definitely important to shift people's mindset on this topic because it's such a sensitive topic. What was some of the feedback you received when your book was released?
Yeah, so, it's had a sort of a quiet rollout, which is fine. Different feedback. I did get disowned over it.
Oh, gosh.
Right, so, this is, if you read the book, right, this is sort of, that's how my family rolls, and, that's fine. I've had, little bits and pieces of getting sort of gnarly emails from folks. I did get somebody tell me that they hoped that there was a civil war and I get thrown in a work camp. I was like, that's very specific.
Yeah.
So I hope he doesn't have a plan.
Oh, my gosh.
But honestly, mostly I've gotten pretty supportive and helpful notes, both from Black and white folks sort of that are interested in having this conversation. And I hadn't thought of this so much when I was working on the book, But I think for Black readers, there's something about it that's helpful because it sets up a way to have this conversation without it coming from the individual Black
Right.
person, right? So it's not sort of you going to your white friend and being like, hey, have you thought about how money impacts, right? That's a hard conversation
Yeah,
to
it's
have.
very
But if you
hard.
say, oh, I saw this book and this lady is writing about this, right? It makes it a little bit of an easier conversation to have. So I wasn't thinking about that, but it was nice to hear that for some folks, that's how it's working.
Absolutely. You had tons of great reviews, and that was really impressive to see. Can you explain what exactly the white bonus means for those who haven't read your book?
Sure, of course. So this is just the back of the envelope rough calculation I do on the 5 subjects in the book, including me, right? So I'm not doing this on other people, but not myself. I do this for me as well. Say, how much money have you gotten since you left home or turned 18? Or maybe if your folks have paid for school or tests or something like that, like when you're younger, I include that. But what have they spent on you, right, after their legal obligation to you ended? And then how likely is it they would have had that money if they weren't white? So this is very much taking an individual story and looking back through and saying, well, are there pressure points in sort of your family's history where they were able to build wealth so that they would have that money to spend? And probably they wouldn't have had it if they weren't white, right? So for things like in my family, right, I found racial covenants on my grandparents' and great-grandparents' homes where they wouldn't have been able to build wealth without being white. I actually discovered that my grandfather was most likely passing. And he was a banker in like from the 20s forward, right? And so
Okay.
he would not have been able to build the wealth that he had. I had a great grandfather who, was a migrant from Missouri, from the South, from the Ozarks, came up to Michigan to work in the factories, started out in the foundry, right, like a lot of workers did. But unlike Black workers, he was able to be promoted out of it, right? Because one of the
Right.
things about industrial sort of unions was that Black workers would get stuck in the hottest, most dangerous parts of plants, so foundries and paint shops usually. And so sort of trace that forward to, my banker grandfather being able to help me out with partly paying for my university degree, right?
Right.
And so sort of being like, well, I benefited from that. And I benefited from this and this and this. And doing a similar analysis on the other folks. I also sort of include what I call a social bonus as well. So that's more looking at what you and sometimes your folks have gotten through implicit bias working in their favor. So this would be things like union membership, when there's a segregated union. Some of this is just a basic sort of a wage differential, right? Like, that there's a wage gap. So what does that look like in folks' lives? And sort of trying to put a dollar amount to it. Certainly the numbers I have in the book are underestimates, if anything, right? Because there's no way to I don't know how to do a comprehensive sort of socially science, rigorous sort of analysis. But for me, I think coming up with a rough way to do this opens up that conversation. And then hopefully researchers who really know how to measure that stuff have a framework to sort of start trying to figure it out, for real, for real.
Absolutely. Now, I know you focus on one of the families from Hattiesburg. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I call them the Beckers. So this is a
Beckers.
family. So they wanted their name change, which I agreed to.
Absolutely.
So these are folks, their kids went through the schools from the mid-90s through the early 20-teens. And I chose sort of that era because it's a period that scholars refer to as resegregation, right? So up through the late 1980s, early 1990s, sort of integration kept, very slowly, but was increasing, right? So you had more and more integrated schools here in Hattiesburg. 1986 was when integration really fully went into effect. It was court ordered, and every school building in the district reflected the demographics of the district, right? So that required some local busing, right, to sort of even out where folks were living in the district and things like that. So this family moves into the district in the late 80s, or actually in the early 90s. They lived in Lamar County. They moved into Hattiesburg. And when their kids are pretty little, the district reaches what they call unitary status, so it becomes considered integrated, and the courts say, okay, we're not going to oversee you anymore, you can do this. And the district actually, it was so fascinating, it's reported in the newspaper, they say, okay, we're going to go back to neighborhood schools, and here's what the demographics will be, and it became very clear. More than half of the white students all of a sudden would be at one elementary, at Thames Elementary, right, which ends up being where this family's kids were at, right? And so then I sort of studied, so I had to map out the entire demographic history of the district and sort of trace all that stuff. And then interestingly, So you have that happen, and Lindsay, the older of the two girls, remembers this reconfiguration of the district happens when she's in 4th grade, and all of a sudden she's in a gifted and talented program that's all white, or not all white, but like almost all white. And up until then, right, it had always been like pretty mixed, right? So she sees it immediately in her classroom and sort of trace that going forward. She stays in the district while it's still performing quite well, but sort of the last sort of big white exodus is happening. So by the time her younger sister Marianne is going through the district, it's really struggling because the district has had some difficult periods. And so by the time she graduates, she's actually very poorly prepared for college and has a very difficult time from that. So she ends up, I mean, she did very well with the extracurriculars here. And I will say, I think is quite a smart person.
Yeah.
But she, got to a liberal arts university up north, like up in like up in the upper Midwest.
Yeah.
And she realized she couldn't write a paper.
Oh, God.
Right. And so she was like, I was like in the top section of my class. I was in all the advanced classes, and I don't know how to do any of this. Right. And so sort of looking both at, there were advantages that white students were getting, particularly being overrepresented in the gifted and talented classes. But then also, right, as you divest from that district and underfund it and stop supporting it, right, it hurts everybody that's stuck in it.
It
right.
does.
So, and I think often white folks think that like, well, we can just sort of work around needing a public school or a collective solution to a big problem. And I think we're at a point in our country where that's not actually true, right? That racism increasingly, all those downstream effects, it's not aimed at white folks, but it really ends up hurting white folks because we actually also need these public institutions, and often have been sort of tricked into not supporting them because we think for some reason that's going to be better for us. So for me, that's the sort of way to set it up.
Absolutely. Do you think the white bonus will ever diminish?
I mean, it has been, right?
Yeah.
I think it has been, although, when you're talking about a bonus, it's relative, right? And I think some of it is that gap is closing, but I think it's also that more white folks are downwardly mobile, right? So the gap is closing, but that's partly because white folks are moving down, right, because of the way the economy is structured. So what I hope is that, this book can help us not just focus on closing that gap, which is really, really important, right? Like that white folks are so overrepresented at sort of high income levels and stuff. That's not right. But also to make sure that we're really focused on raising that floor so that nobody falls too far down.
Absolutely. Now, I just want to thank you so much for coming on today and providing insight into what you do. This book is very important, and this conversation needs to be had. So thank you so much for writing this.
Thanks, Miracle. Well, I hope folks will be able to come out at 5:30 to the, was it Gonzalez Hall, I think, or auditorium. It'd be great to see folks.
Absolutely. Now, coming up, we've got a news wrap with Nishranika Pokhrel reporting on a USM AI workshop.
For Southern Miss Student Media, I'm Nishranika. You cannot go into any field these days without the mention of artificial intelligence. This is also seen in academia. Southern Miss has now made it mandatory for every professor to state their stance on AI, causing much confusion among students. The Center of Student Success is now organizing a student workshop on the proper use of AI. The workshop is titled Using AI or Not Using AI in College Classroom and will take place 4 times over the semester. The workshops will be led by professors in different fields, according to Associate Provost for Faculty Success, Dr. Kelly Lester.
We have 4 faculty who are facilitating the workshops right now. They are Dr. Michelle McLeese, who is in sociology. We have Dr. Kayla Stan, who is in geography. We have Miss Jamie Gavin in finance, and we have Miss Hillary Scales Lewis, who is in theater. And so even as you listen to their disciplinary backgrounds, we did that purposely to be sure that there's broad application and thought process about how AI might be used.
The students of Southern Miss have generally had a positive reaction to the upcoming workshop. Jessica Stresta, a polymer science major, expresses her thoughts on the workshop.
AI is a powerful tool. It has a lot of potential to enhance how we work, study, and even how we approach problems at all. While it's really powerful, I think that knowing how to use it properly is more important than using it at all. I believe a workshop in AI will help us understand how AI can complement our work and not just replace it. A workshop would be really helpful to help us navigate and take advantage of AI in the right way.
Registration for the workshops is still open. So far, over 40 students have already registered for the workshop. For Southern Miss Media, I'm Nishranika.
With thanks, Southern Miss Today on Southern Miss Radio is presented to you. We are thankful to Carl, our audio engineer, and Gabby, our film producer, for keeping this bird in the air. We would especially want to thank our program director, Shania, our executive producer, Ari, our assistant producer, Hannah, and our general manager, Dr. Martin. That concludes Southern Miss Today activities for today. I appreciate you listening, and remember to always aim high and fly like an eagle. I'm your host, Miracle Jennings, signing off.
Sponsorship comes from Southern Beverage, your local Michelob Ultra distributor. Michelob Ultra has significantly fewer carbs and calories per serving if you are watching those in your diet. You can reach Southern Beverage by phone at 601-268-9111, or you can find them on the internet at southernbeverage.com. Anheuser-Busch, St. Louis, Missouri, and Southern Beverage ask you to please drink responsibly.